Welcome, everybody. This is another Patreon episode. Thank you for joining us, as we say on the other podcast, Behind the Paywall. So, yes, we are going to be talking about digital versus physical releases in gaming and all therein. Mike, this was a topic that you wanted to discuss most of all. Can you tell us why?
Yeah, it's something that comes up a lot these days. I was interested in some games that were coming out digitally, and then I started seeing things were showing up with groups like Limited Run was the big one, I think, to get started.
Yeah.
Limited Run games. And then I started seeing some others, I think, like Strictly Limited and stuff. And with the Switch being such a massive beast, in terms of sales, I think that a lot of other people have tried to get in on this and have produced, indie games for the Switch. And it's really just been very interesting to me because I've gone back and forth through the years. I know you had a similar experience of having to move around. So when I was, I grew up in the 90s, well, the 80s and the 90s. I was born in 79. So it was all physical media, and it was a whole lot of trouble. It was a lot of difficulty because I went to a boarding school for high school. So I was constantly back and forth between New York and Pennsylvania. I was moving like everything all the time for every little vacation to go home, and then the end of the school year, and then I got to go back in a couple of months and move into a new dorm and all that. And then I did the
Michael, why do you have so many goddamn video games?
Yeah,
I can hear your family.
Oh my god, yeah. What is all this stuff? Why do you have so much stuff? My god. We borrowed.
Aren't you too old for this shit?
Yeah, and CDs, man. So like,
yeah.
To me, like I was just always looking for ways to streamline this stuff. So my CDs, I had hundreds of CDs. I was buying albums as often as I could with what little money I had. There was a nice little like CD and record exchange in town when I was in high school.
What kind of music do you listen to, by the way?
I listened to a whole lot of everything, but growing up, I really only listened to rap. It was like, it's basically, I was watching Reading Rainbow one day, and all of a sudden this rap came on about books, and I just like stood up out of the chair, and I was like staring at the screen, completely mesmerized, listening to this. And my sister was like, "Do you like that?" And I was like, "Yeah, what is that?" She was like,
"Maybe
that's rap music." And I was like, I think this is really good, and she made me a mixtape and stuff. And the rap about books on Reading Rainbow was Run DMC.
Oh shit.
So,
okay.
The funny thing is I relayed this story to DMC when I went to Comic-Con a few years back. And it just like his whole crew was cracking up because I was just like, I just want to tell you a story. And I told him about how I watched Reading Rainbow as a kid. And I was like, I can't go see LeVar because he charges like $80 to get in there, and I can't, but I was able to just walk up to DMC and say, "What's up?" So I told him, and it was a good time. But
That's awesome,
so I listened to only rap really growing up, but then, well, I say growing up, but there's my really young years. Probably about 7th grade, I started branching out into other types of music and stuff, listening to rock, and then alternative came on strong, like Pearl Jam and Nirvana and all that.
Right.
I started really branching out, and when I went to high school, there were people from like all over the world and all over America, and I was just like, yo, there's so much to hear. The big stuff my freshman year of high school for me was 9 Inch Nails, Rage Against the Machine. I would say those. Oh, and Beck's first album, Mellow Gold. Those were big ones for me.
That was a hell of an album, man.
Yeah, good times with that. So I bought all these CDs, right? And what I would do was I was like, I can't carry all this stuff back. And that's when I started getting rid of the cases. I started getting rid of the artwork. And I was doing whatever I could because the Super NES cartridges were big. The Genesis cartridges were taking up space. And I just started streamlining everything because I didn't have enough space. What was I going to do with it? And that never really stopped being a problem for me because I went to college and then I went to Japan and then I came back from Japan and then I went to Japan again and then I came back and then I moved out to another place and then I moved to another place. I was constantly on the move. I was always renting or something. So like I never had a lot of space. So for
Mm-hmm.
me, the idea that I could start getting things digitally was really appealing because I was like, then I don't have to worry about where to store this stuff. Um,
Right.
but eventually I started to miss it. I started to miss the physical act of like picking up a cartridge and putting it in the system or picking out the disc and putting it in. And so I started to get into it a bit, but then things changed again in the video game industry. And like everything was like a day one patch of X number of gigs, and it felt like there was no point anymore to me having a disc. And I just
Right.
it was just like if I was gonna have to download all this stuff on day one, well then what's the point?
Right.
So
That's true. It's not actually on the disc itself. It's not on that physical thing anymore, like it used
right.
to
So
be,
like, it's
or a lot of it
the
anyway.
games like we were talking about Revenge of Shinobi at the time, right? And there were different versions of that released. And so I'm glad that I had like the original version on the cartridge, but it's long since gone. I sold it along with all my Genesis games and Super Nintendo games to buy a PlayStation back in junior year of high school. I really
Right.
regretted that for a while. It was a tough one. But
Yeah.
uh but yeah, like now the games like you kind of want the more up to date version. So it's it's this issue that's what really brought it to mind was like this whole life experience of trying to go back and forth and just dealing with the physicality of all of these goods and trying to manage my huge game library and still make it back and forth between countries and not have things stolen or damaged. It's never easy.
Um, so with my situation, I mean, as you can see, I am surrounded
Mhm.
by physical media.
Yeah.
I'm not against it.
I'm in like an empty room.
Yeah. I mean, I've got it all over the place. I've got even like Super Famicom games and shit here.
Oh, nice.
Um, you know, but it wasn't always like this, Mike.
Mm.
Whenever I mean, when I was a kid, I was a doctor's kid, so when it was, like, Christmas and I had 2
Mhm.
brothers, so, like, we had most of the systems and we got all the games because it was the '90s, there was no internet, or even when there was, you weren't downloading PS1 games on it and shit, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So,
Yeah.
I grew up with physical, of course, and a lot of it, if you combine me and my brothers, and every time a new system would come out, we'd sell it all and get the new system, you know? I remember there was one time when we sold our Virtual Boy and we sold, like, just a ton of shit, and the guy Software Etc., which was like our Babbage's, was like our
Yeah, I
electronics
remember that
boutique.
place.
It was like, they were like, "This is quite a collection." I remember him saying that.
Yeah.
So, um, I grew up with it a lot. Um, in college, since I was a doctor's kid, I never thought like I didn't have a lot of stuff. I
Mhm.
always thought like I had more than most.
Yeah.
But when I got to college, it kind of felt like, at least the guys I was hanging out with,
Yeah.
they had so much shit in their rooms. It was like this times 5, 2 to 5 times as much, I'm not kidding. Like, they were
Man.
well, one of the guys kind of like a hoarder, but
Mhm.
just a bunch of shit, and, like, they were like, "Oh, you go to Best Buy on Tuesdays to get the DVD releases," and I didn't even know fucking Tuesday was the DVD release day.
Oh, I
You
was
know
one of
what I
those
mean?
guys. I knew the release
Yeah.
days of different media.
I had absolutely no idea, and I never thought went without, and I mean, I really didn't,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
fucking, um, compared to these guys, and they weren't, like, rich per se, they had just never sold anything, and they kept all their
Mhm.
shit, so that was part of it, but, like, in college, I didn't have shit, and then when I went to Japan, I had less shit, and also in college, I've said this before, but that was my video game dark age where
Mhm.
I never owned a PS2 or a GameCube or an Xbox One, or what was right after. It's like Xbox One had a weird timeline.
The
It lasted.
Xbox One came out, I think, in like November 2001. I know I saw it at
Yeah.
TGS in 2001. So I'm not
Okay.
sure. It might have been 2002 because I was in Japan, so I didn't actually get one until I got back to America in 2002.
Okay. But it seems like it ran alongside PS1 and PS2 because 360 was the next one, right? And that was PS3.
Yeah, because the PS2 came out, I think, in 2000. It might have been late
2000.
2000.
2000.
My senior
Yeah.
year of college was 2000, 2001. I think it came out like in November 2000 in America. So there
Yeah.
was still
So,
overlap with the PS1. That revamped version got put out. That was probably like, I don't know, 2001, 2002.
okay.
That nice small
Yeah. So
version.
I missed all that.
Mm.
I mean, I would play it in my friends, friends' dorms and shit.
Mhm.
Man, GameCube is definitely the lost system for me. I hated that controller. Uh,
Yeah, I was
like,
not a fan. I just it was all about Metroid Prime for me. Everything else was just like, okay.
yeah, people have a lot of fond memories of that. They love it. They would buy that controller for Switch and shit, which I don't understand, but whatever. I guess
Mm.
nostalgia is king. But,
Yeah.
um, you know, I went a long time without having anything. Man, I was so poor in my 20s, and then for like half of my 30s, man, like I had freedom, but like when you knew me in Japan, I was pretty
Mhm.
poor. I didn't have anything. I was living paycheck to paycheck for years, years and years and years.
Mm. Yeah.
And so I didn't buy shit generally. And I finally got a PS3 in Japan and an Xbox 360. Anyway, cut to now I have a bunch, but you don't buy that much new physical shit because, dude, how lazy are we? I do not want to walk to the system and change out the disc. I want to
I
change it
am
in the menu.
absolutely with you. And it's just like I see how different my life is now. So the thing is I recently moved into a house, right? So now like
Yeah.
I have more than one floor. I have space. So I have a system here and then a system upstairs because we use them as media devices too, you know. And it's just like, well, if I want to go back between the two devices, I want the easiest way to do it, which is digital ownership. And the company that does digital ownership the best, hands down, is Microsoft. They just straight up
Right.
embarrass Sony, and Nintendo's like not even at the party. They're like, "What are you guys talking about?" It's
Nintendo's
insane.
making billions off little kids. They're just not even competing.
Yeah, like they know they're like we're always gonna be able to get like a certain youth market, and they'll stick with us for however long, and hopefully stuff hits. I think the Wii U should have hit much better than it did. I thought it had some great offerings, but yeah, it's just Nintendo goes and makes their own rules and does whatever the hell they want, and everybody supports them for it somehow or other.
They made a green monochrome screen that was one of the best-selling systems of all time. You know,
Dude,
they
it
just
was
they know what
oh.
they're doing.
I was. You remember? I think we talked about this. It was. I think in Matt Alt's book where he talks about Gunpei Yokoi feeling like sick to his stomach, worried about the performance of the Game Boy, and I was like, he absolutely should have felt that anxiety because that was terrible hardware. I did not want it as a kid. I remember looking at it and being like, why would I play this? I'd rather wait till I got home. Simple as that.
I mean, like I've said before, my town was heavily Nintendo oriented, it felt like, and everyone had a
Mm.
Game Boy, and Mario was great, Kirby was great, even with the Zelda was great. Like their fucking software was awesome. So even with that screen,
Yeah.
and plus it was most people's first portable. So you kind of were like, I'll just deal with the green screen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I couldn't believe. I remember being a kid and just being like, "Does nobody have standards? What is this?"
Yeah. Well, you had the Turbo Duo fucking portable deal.
Yeah, the Turbo Express. Yeah, and I had the Atari Lynx that I used to play California games on while I watched 21 Jump Street. Yeah. Good times, man.
That's awesome, dude.
I was
I got links on
multitasking and
emulator.
not paying attention back in the day.
Oh, I actually did have a Lynx like way late in the game, like I think after it had already died, but
Mm.
just to have it. But I never played a game I liked on. I don't think I had California games.
The surfing in California games on the Lynx was somehow the best version. I don't know why. Like I've tried to go back and play other California games, just being like, "Oh, I love the surfing," and then being like, "This isn't very good. This isn't. I can't do the
It's, n-
cool spins easily like I could on the Lynx." Like just yeah,
it's
don't
not the
know. I
same,
guess
huh?
that's if you guys are in the market for California games, I recommend the Lynx version, best version, just so you could get the best
Yeah.
surfing version. But it's been so long, maybe it's not that great and I have to go back to it, but I'll just let it live in my memory.
So with the physical releases too, man, like
Mhm.
the shelf porn is huge. Like that's one of the best parts, just having it on your shelf. Everybody likes to have their shit on their shelf, their trinkets. So I
Yeah.
understand that. I love that Limited Run is doing what they're doing. Actually, the HyperX
Mhm.
podcast network, that's
Mhm.
run in some part by Jeremy Parrish, which is works at or maybe even owns or whatever for Limited Run
Mhm.
in North Carolina. It's a fucking North Carolina company, but they're
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
great work. I cannot believe they fucking re-released Crypt Killer. That was like a Sega CD
Yeah.
32X game, which lived on in my memory, but I thought I was the only one that knew about that fucking game. Like no one ever
Yeah.
talked about it, and that was re-released. And fucking Plumbers Don't Wear Ties for 3DO they're releasing.
Yeah, I had never heard of that until they did that re-release, and I was like, "What are we talking about here?"
That was an adults only game, I think. That's another Patreon episode where we talk. I think that was adults only. So
Yeah.
I remember seeing ads for that or something. I remember looking into it on early internet, maybe.
Mhm.
You know, so yeah, like what Limited Run is doing is amazing. And the other
Yeah.
thing is all these, this is kind of tangential almost, but the physical releases for the indie world where the indie
Mhm.
developers make a game for Genesis or whatever. Like
Yeah.
there's an indie release world for Neo Geo CD. There's a fucking new Neo Geo CD release this month, I think.
Yeah.
Can you
That's
fucking believe that?
it's so cool. It really is. Like I remember I think the first time I knew that Dreamcast games were still getting produced here and there, and this is like before the sort of current revitalization of the physical media and all. Like I think Sturmwind or something came along, and just through the years, because the Dreamcast died prematurely, it was getting support from these indie developers. But when I saw the recent resurgence, I think was Xenocrisis. Is that the name of the game? It was a Genesis game,
Maybe.
and it showed up on Xbox and it showed up on other systems and stuff. And I really enjoyed that game. I thought it was really well made. I kind of wished that I could play it on a CRT in a classic style, but
Right.
I was perfectly happy to play it on the Xbox. It came on Game Pass, so
That's cool.
yeah,
I mean, there's that full on looking like a triple A 16-bit game called Solar Pier
yeah,
or whatever. That
yeah,
was like a late release super late, like a couple years ago late Genesis game. Um, I think even Jaguar's got that scene and they're releasing physical media. Don't I mean maybe they're 3D printing the cartridges or they kind of erase a shitty game's data and put their new game on that because I don't know how they're doing all that part
yeah.
of
I
it.
don't know. I'm
But it's
surprised because I don't know how many people own a Jaguar.
I mean all those systems, dude. But Jaguar
Yeah,
especially because it was they didn't have a whole lot of production. Like there was probably 100,000 or more SNES
yeah.
carts across the globe. But Jaguar, you know, uh,
Mhm.
but man, it's just amazing that physical media lives on in that way. I just
Yeah,
wouldn't. A new Neo Geo CD game? That's fucking crazy, dude. I can't believe it.
yeah. But like, so this is the thing, right? So why is physical media doing so well now, right? And we've seen, in other forms of entertainment, right? The record, right? The vinyl is just, it's huge. The sales for vinyl are insane and they're so expensive, but there's something to it. People really enjoy and appreciate that physical experience. There's something to the analog experience of putting the needle on the record, hearing that sound come through the speakers.
Well, with vinyl, that makes more sense than games in a sense
Hmm.
because vinyl sounds better. There's no
There
way
is.
around it. It is the best sounding medium to this
Mm.
day. CD MP3 is close second, but it's missing some sort of warmth or something. If it's what you call it, if it's electronic music, you're not going to hear much of a difference. But if it's
Mhm.
a something with timbre in it, something with a certain kind of atmosphere, especially if you have good speakers, in a record player, like there's nothing better. I grew up with listening to my mom's record player. My mom has a big
Mhm.
record collection. Um, Looking back now, I feel like a lot of people kind of miss out on that if their parents didn't listen to music that much. Like
Yeah, so
that
I
was really
was
key.
like, my house, we didn't really have, we had tapes mostly. So I did
Okay,
listen to tapes a lot. And I recognize there's a difference in even like FM versus playing a CD in the car. Somehow or other, while the CD sounds clearer, FM feels strangely more alive. And I don't know why. I've never been much of an audiophile. I actually
that's
prefer
probably
lo-fi stuff in a lot of ways.
a lot of people do. That's true. I mean, dude, there's like a preference in. Okay, so we're going off the course here, but we'll bring it back to physical in a second. In black metal specifically,
Mhm.
there's a real preference for lo-fi. At
Mm.
least for some, there's even subgenres of black metal. So lo-fi black metal is a subgenre,
Wow.
and that's because the original Norwegian, some of the original Norwegian guys recorded that way. They got the shittiest mics they could. It was all really lo-fi on purpose, and they're also kind of against playing with in front of huge crowds, like it's real fucking pretentious. But there's something to it,
Mm.
live in a more personal
Yeah.
setting. But it's all on cassette tapes too. Like there's a preference for cassette tapes, and for me, coming from my generation, I
Mhm.
understand. I understand the lo-fi or the great sound of vinyl, and I understand CDs, but cassettes, there's almost nothing good about it. There's nothing good about it at all. But some people like that. They really want that sound.
Yeah, I was really surprised to see that cassettes were getting attention these days at all.
Like
So,
whenever
it's not a
John Stewart,
reliable physical medium either.
yeah, people prefer that cassette sound, man, and I find that. Oh, what I was gonna say was John Stewart, whenever he was first
Mhm,
talking about Instagram on Daily Show,
mhm,
he didn't get why people would want the old photo look on
mhm.
Instagram because the way he grew up, it was better to see things move in this direction, but he didn't have any nostalgia like we have and people
Yeah,
younger than us for that older sound. So I feel like that's how people younger than us might see cassettes. I'm not
mhm.
really sure, and we're the John Stewart of cassettes. I don't know.
I mean, I loved them back then. I used them to record stuff off the radio while I played Ghostbusters on the Genesis, but, like, you know, it's not a medium that I'm really happy to go back to. I don't wanna rewind anything. I don't wanna no.
Yeah,
MP3s are very convenient for me. I love them.
yeah,
But I think this is something I was trying to get at a little before, where, like, I think a lot of people have come to realize the lack of ownership, and that you have these
right.
terms of service when you deal with the digital thing. So, like, I buy a game from Steam, I buy a game from, Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo. Technically, I'm licensing it, and it's at the discretion of the owner of the license if they wanna just cut me off from it. Now we know, that there's a consumer angle here. I think that I didn't go back and research this. I should have, but Microsoft had an MP3 service. Do you remember this? The Zune,
Yeah, that was made fun of in Guardians of the Galaxy.
right? But they had a marketplace. There was no reason for it to not be a competitor, a serious competitor. It's
Right.
just weird. It's weird how people perceive brands and all that crap. It's just yeah. The Zune
Were
was
you a
perfectly
Zune? Were you a
no. I didn't.
Zuner?
No, I didn't have one because I had bought an iPod prior to that. But if I
Yeah.
hadn't had one, I probably would have said like, yeah, I'll take a Zune. What do I care? It's an
It
MP3
was
player.
it was timing, man, and this was the time whenever Apple was really, hitting its stride.
Yeah.
You had those, like, colorful fucking early 2000s iMacs out. The new iMac OS was great. It had
Yeah.
absolutely no viruses. Their
As
hardware was great. Like, and the iPod really took right the fuck off, and so the Zune tried to compete, but it just couldn't, dude. It's
but
they were
it
just had
was
such a
really nice
iron
hardware.
grip.
It had a nice operating system. Honestly, like if I had it to start over again, I probably would have just said like, yeah, I think the Zune is nicer than the iPod I have. But the iPod was already there. I already had it. What was I wasn't going to bother to go and change everything over. But what happened was when Microsoft said we're pulling out of this business now. That's it. I'm pretty sure that they actually refunded people the money spent on their libraries. So we've seen from Microsoft, say, for example, with the 360 Red Ring of Death and all, is that they are willing to do right by the consumer. Not that they would be willing without the consumer's demand, but they know,
Yeah,
like, hey, if we don't do right by them, we're kind of SOL here. So,
right.
like, I know that they can revoke my license, but I feel pretty comfortable with a company like Microsoft. I don't feel comfortable with Nintendo. I think that Nintendo will just willy-nilly be like, "Yeah, we're stopping that," like the 3DS eShop and all that stuff with here now. And Sony, they tried to cut us off just recently, right? Like multiple
The
times.
PSP store?
Yeah, like they were trying to do all these things and people were like, You can't do that." So like
So,
it's funny
wait,
because
I need this explained to me beat by beat. So, basically, you're saying that as soon as the store dies, you can't even download games that you've bought. Is that what
so
it
it
is?
depends. It depends, right? It's at the company's discretion. And this is part of the terms of service that we agree to, right? When you say like, "Oh, I'm going to buy this digital album from you or a digital game," I agree, check the box. I'm not going to read the 40-page legal document. The legal document says over the course of those 40 pages, like, we're not liable for anything. You're merely licensing the use of this. It can be revoked at any time for whatever reason at the discretion of the license holder, that kind of thing. And that's all legalese talk. So, like, I don't think it's even really necessarily fair to expect that the average consumer in any country is going to understand the kind of language that goes into these contracts. I really do think it's unfair. I think they should be written in a way that the layman can understand, right? And of course, the most pertinent information should be right at the top. But I think that people who are really into physical media now are the ones who recognize that this is a problem and that these corporations have the right to take away anything that you've purchased at any time. You don't own anything. You're renting it indefinitely.
Mike, I gotta tell you, this is all news to me, bro. I did not know. I
Yeah.
didn't know this was a thing. I suspected it maybe, but I didn't know this was actually happening. I thought maybe they would keep some sort of server up to where you couldn't buy new games because the store
Mhm.
was gone, but you could download the games that you had bought from them.
So that's the thing, right? The company gets to set that. In the case of Microsoft, that's been true, right? Like I've been able to do that. Unfortunately, say like Marvel versus Capcom 2, right? I bought that digitally on the 360. I have it. It's in my library. I have the rights to it still, even though it's been delisted, but I don't have a 360 and that game doesn't have BC support. So I can't do anything with it. It's unless I buy another 360, I can connect my 360 to the internet and download that game. I can re-download it. Steam, Valve did a great job with that because they were really the first. They were the big pioneers in this digital marketplace. You know, they were the ones really making a difference with it. Um, they basically will say like, yeah, we're gonna make sure you still have access to your games. So Outrun 2 or Outrun Coast to Coast 2006, that's been delisted because the Sega doesn't have the license to Ferrari anymore.
Oh my god.
But I still have access to the game. It's still in my library because that's Steam's policy. But recently, Ubisoft tried to delist some Assassin's Creed game. I don't know, there's like 400 now. And people were like, oh, well, it gets delisted, but like I paid for it already, so I still have it. And Ubisoft was telling Valve that they needed to remove it entirely from the person's library. and people got upset, and so they had to backtrack on that. But that's it. Like, that's what I'm saying is we kind of, it has to be consumer angst that makes sure that we can hold on to this, that we continue to have digital access to these things that we don't really own, because it's just a bad look. It's a bad look for them. They know
I
that
oh
if they
man.
take it away according to the rights by the contract that we've all agreed to by purchasing digital stuff and not reading their 40 pages of blah blah, that they're going to have a problem. People just aren't going to buy from them in the future. People are going to be pissed. People are going to put together a class action lawsuit. And while that doesn't really help each average consumer, it gets the message out there and it hurts the company and big. Usually it's just the lawyers pay out, really. It's not so much the individuals. But that's what we kind of have to rely on. And in this case, I feel like Microsoft is the only console manufacturer that I have any real faith in to do right by anyone in the future. But the funny thing is, now we're seeing Microsoft go for this for Game Pass, which is kind of the Netflix approach of like nobody owns anything at all, and that game is going to go out of rotation.
Oh yeah, especially if you're playing, like, I was thinking about this. If you're playing an RPG and
Mm-hmm.
then like you have to kind of, let's say you're like 90 hours into a game and then it goes offline the next day. Like, what are you going to do? You
Yeah.
have to keep track of when that game goes out of rotation. Hopefully they
Yeah.
put in like especially for the RPGs, put in like a warning, because there's probably a lot of people just downloading games and not checking gaming news sites. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah,
So
there's within Game Pass, it tells you which games are leaving soon and all that stuff. And when you sign up for Game Pass, you do get a discount for any game that's featured on Game Pass. So if you are interested in buying something from them, at least I think you'll get something like 10 to 20% off of any game that's available on Game Pass if you
okay.
have an active subscription to that.
I do, and I don't use it enough, but I have it. But yeah, it's
Mm.
like instead of owning some things, rent
Mhm.
all the things. I mean, that's
Yeah.
how I do things, man. That's how I do my music on Apple Music and everything. But I feel a little weird about it for sure. I mean,
Mhm.
I feel like other than this shit in this room, I don't own any physical media,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, it's just such a weird thing because like I would like to own more physical media. I would, but physical media is not, it's not as permanent as I think people would like to believe. I
Right.
had a whole bunch of books. I used to love these as a kid. I would get these like Disney comic strip collections. So it
Yeah.
was like a whole Donald Duck thing from newspapers or something in the 40s and 50s. And I loved those books. I would go back and read them, and I had like some old Dick Tracy stuff. And I left it because when I went to Japan, I needed someone to hold on to it for me. I wasn't going to carry all those books over with me, right? I
Yeah.
gave them to my sister. She put them up in her garage, and the garage caught fire.
Yeah.
I never saw those books again.
That
Or if
sucks,
there had
man.
been a flood, like it's just there. The physical stuff is there, right? But it's also not impervious to damage or anything. You could also be dealing with
Yeah.
bit rot. So like I have PlayStation 1 games. They're pretty old now, and I don't know. There could be bit rot going on for some of them. I've
Yeah.
tried to look into this, and it's kind of like we can't really predict when it'll happen, but
Okay.
you cannot have faith in the permanence of any physical medium.
Right. 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 That's
So
true.
it's kind of a weird thing. It's kind of like play it while you got it, but I don't have enough time to do that for everything.
I know. Yeah. Yeah, it's true, man. I have like a billion games and I only play a handful. You know?
Yeah,
That's just how it is.
yeah.
This has been enlightening for me. Thank you,
I
Mark, for
hadn't
bringing this to
realized.
my
I didn't.
attention.
Yeah, I hadn't realized. So yeah, folks, if you're listening, think about it. Think long and hard about it, and make decisions accordingly. So there might be something where you say, I have this digitally, but I'm a little concerned, and when something goes on sale, maybe I'll grab it cheaper in physical form. You might not get the most up-to-date version if you try to come back later and the service is not available, but yeah, it's
Right.
pretty complex. It's a complex future we're living in.
I mean, I suspected as much, but I can't believe they would just take away games from people. That's the most like you spent the full price on it if it was a cartridge, if it was a CD. So, which is also
Mhm.
ridiculous. They shouldn't be $60, but maybe with inflation, maybe they are $60 digital now. But if that's it, but at any rate, they can't be the same price, physical and digital, whatever it is. Um,
It's
it's just
it's one of those things where, like, if they know they're beholden still to a lot of brick and mortar retail stores, and if the
right.
digital marketplace is going to undercut the brick and mortar stores, then the brick and mortar stores have no reason to carry those physical media anymore, right? So they'd be losing out on the big sellers like Walmart, Best Buy, GameStop, because
They
they'd be
just
like,
sell
well, why should we have
Funkos.
that? But GameStop's another oof. They're ridiculous. They
Yeah,
have the key to success and they just ignore it because they're a bunch of schmucks. But that's a whole other
yeah,
story.
I agree.
Yeah.
I never, dude. I was never got on the GameStop train so much because I was always into my software, etc. growing up, and they were bought out and they died or whatever. But that
Yeah.
was my store growing up, and I even recorded an interview of um, the store owner when I was a kid, like
Hmm.
4 or 5 years ago on Superhero Stuff You Should Know podcast. There,
That's
I might need
cool.
to bring I might need to bring that one over to here because it makes more sense now. But yeah, I mean that's how close we were. He came over to our house. We played with my brothers and him. We played Star Fox 64. Like it was a good old time. The 90s were great, but yeah,
Yeah.
GameStop felt so impersonal, man. Software Etc. was like more mom and pop shop ish. But I guess that's it. I'm gonna probably get more physical media after this conversation, man. I don't know. Like maybe the ultimate decision is shell out the money for both digital and physical.
It's something I've done a couple of times.
Yeah.
It's very rare that I do that, but yes, I have said, I'm getting the digital one because I need that for convenience. This is really how I'm likely to experience the product. But I end up loving it, and then I keep an eye out, and when I see it go on sale physically, I'm like, all right, I want to grab that. That's cool.
Right.
just
Right.
just in case.
Right. All right. Well, let us know what you thought about this in the comments, everybody.
Yep.
Any other parting thoughts before we're out of here, Mike?
Yeah. So just whatever you're doing in terms of digital purchases, you might want to review the terms of service. That goes for music, that goes for movies, that goes for whatever is. I'm pretty sure it's standard across the board, whatever it may be. Whatever you've paid for digitally, you don't actually own. So just consider that.
Oh man. All right. Well, thanks again, everybody, and we will catch you later.
Peace.